Good afternoon and welcome to UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studios. In the studio today I've got Patrick Henningsen, and obviously myself, Brian Gerrish, will be taking you through some of the more interesting parts of national and international news. If you're not sure of the day, it's Friday the 21st of September 2012, and the weather in Plymouth is rather chilly, a bit autumnal, overcast, possibly some sunshine, and we've had a special report from our weather monitor in the Lake District, who tells us that it's very sunny and beautiful up there. So well done to the team up north, but we're suffering a bit in Plymouth. Good to have you here, Patrick.
Thanks, Brian.
Well, the first few stories we've got today are really back on the subject of the quality of the people that we've been silly enough to elect into government. And it's quite clear that we've got individuals at the moment who are embedded in Westminster. They seem to be either unsuitable or they've got some form of vested interest. And the first story we've got here is from The Guardian, talking about the Tory Treasurer. I've got some small print here, so I need my glasses. This gentleman's Lord Fink, and he's been calling for tax law changes to make the UK more like a tax haven. And this really good article from The Guardian is pointing out the interest that this man's got. He's a Tory donor, he's a hedge fund chief, and he's been lobbying George Osborne for a cut in taxes on invisible earnings. And he's saying that basically he and other hedge funders no longer feel obliged to set up companies such places as the Cayman Islands. And his suggestion is that he ought to be able to bring more business into the UK. So he's a director of 3 firms who have subsidies or a parent company in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg and Guernsey. And according to The Guardian, he said, "I don't see why the UK should not compete for jobs that at present are going to the Cayman Islands. I lobbied George Osborne when the Tories were in opposition. I've long felt that the British government loses jobs to tax havens by allowing the revenue to have these rather archaic rules." Presumably, Patrick, by that he means actually taxing these people. I don't know whether that's true. And what The Guardian has revealed, an investigation has revealed that 68 MPs and peers who can influence Britain's tax laws are either directors or non-executive directors of firms linked to tax havens. So the meat of this seems to be that we're back in this very grey area where we don't know whether we've got people in power who are there to represent the best interests of the electors, or they're there to represent their company interests.
Sure, it's not uncommon that there are many people in the sort of millionaire bracket or multi-millionaire bracket in Parliament, in both chambers of government. And maybe, I dare say, 30 or 40 years ago, Brian, that wouldn't have been the case. There were a lot more people who were in public service for just that, to be a public servant. Now it's seen as a kind of really great way to get in to scope out potential business opportunities, not just for the time that they're in office, but when they come out of office. Right. This gentleman sits on the board of at least one company, or is an executive or non-executive director, and really they're able to lobby for legislation that could improve their own personal fortune or the fortune of their corporate interests.
So we're talking vested interest, aren't we?
Absolutely. In the United States, this is now the status quo. Yeah. Everybody pretty much in Congress and Senate, save for a few really ethical and honest public servants, are really in there. If you look at the earning potential on a graph, it's incredible in the United States from the time that they join office to when they leave office, their personal fortune skyrockets.
Well, a bit like Tony Blair, that's now into the multi-millionaire bracket on the basis of what's happened in Parliament. Mike, you got...
Well, I just wanted to mention Channel 4's Dispatches, which 2 or 3 months ago did a documentary on what must be the height of sheer hypocrisy, which was senior members of HMRC also getting involved in these kind of businesses based in Jersey in order to avoid tax, and they were exposing that. So it's not just MPs and civil servants in general, but specifically those who are supposed to be responsible for collecting our taxes are also getting their hands dirty with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, part of the topic of our news yesterday was actually corruption. We're not saying direct corruption with this gentleman, but it is corruption of the process, it's corruption of our constitution. And of course we've had Tony Blair in his day calling for there to be an elite in power, not elected people, but an elite. And I believe you mentioned VVIPs to me briefly yesterday, was it?
It's a new strata.
Right.
It's a new strata. Above the VIP is the VVIP, and this is obviously the political class, which are now quasi-celebrity in 2012. So yes, this is a upper echelon, if you will. These
people. Well, if we take a different look, we've got to come back to Mr. Clegg. Remember that Mr. Clegg is the Deputy Prime Minister of Great Britain. And he's the man who has now been singing apologies over his failure to live up to his promises to the students, not in Britain, the students in England, who are having to pay vast amounts to go through their education. And the amazing thing about the Guardian article, which we got up on screen at the moment, is that it says Nick Clegg's mocked, reviled and admired mea culpa is the clearest sign possible that he intends to remain leader. So I find it unbelievable that who's written this article, Patrick Winter from The Guardian, should suggest that anybody could possibly admire a man who is the deputy leader of a major nation. I think I'm allowed to still say this. And we've got the pathetic situation of him singing to apologise. In the article, though, it's recognised that in March 2010, he was touring the university campuses, signing a pledge to abolish fees. And what the article says here is that while he was doing this, his private team, preparing for coalition negotiations, had recognised they were ideologically isolated on the issue. For those ordinary people, including us, what they actually mean is they knew full well that they couldn't carry out the pledges. So effectively that's deception. And of course, later on, the article goes on to say that he, Clegg, is now determined to use the episode to show his party has matured and will not play such cheap politics again. So here we have the leader of the Lib Dems admitting that he has reduced Lib Dem politics to cheap politics. He has deceived the students who are now being crippled and dragged into the debt system. And he has to sing his apologies. Surely it's time for this man to go, isn't it? Well,
Nick Clegg, I saw another poll today, yesterday in the Standard, by the way, where they said that the reason why a number of people would have accepted a coalition government is because of based on looks. So again, going towards the American style of politics, that is, you have to have a proper head of hair and be of a certain look. That's sort of, it's kind of a generic package for a politician.
The clone, basically.
The clone, and that's what Clegg is. He's an empty vessel, if you will, politically. But what he did by accepting the coalition with the Tory government was effectively torpedo the Liberal Democrat Party, and they will never recover. It will take them 20 years to recover. They're losing membership by the day because of this alliance. And so the establishment has effectively neutralized a potentially powerful third party in this country that would have emerged in 10 years to maybe take the majority of seats in Parliament. So.
And could we suggest, I think, let's suggest that actually the real reason for this is to reduce UK from a three-party state to a two-party state. Now we've just got one more step to take. And we were hearing a little bit about this with what the MPs are calling for with Leveson, that we want the parties to work together in order to get control over the press and media. So we've quickly gone from three parties to two parties, one more step and control of the media, and these deceitful politicians will have pulled us into a police state, a dictatorship. And some of the journalists, be it the Mail or the Telegraph or the Guardian, don't seem to realise what happens to journalists in a dictatorship. We've got a further example. which is taken from the Mail. And this is very interesting. This is a chief whip, a Tory enforcer called Andrew Mitchell, who lost his temper with police just outside Downing Street because he thought he should be able to cycle through the gate for cars, and they wanted him to get off and walk. And so he basically, according to the Mail, Cabinet Minister Andrew Mitchell called armed police guarding Downing Street effing plebs. I'm going to use that expression on UKCon Live to get the emphasis, but he was using a very unpleasant word when they told him to get off his bike. And more importantly, I think for this programme, the Chief Whip also told officers to learn your effing place. So here we've got, I believe, another millionaire who thinks that he is so important, not only in the Tory party, but in Westminster, that he can use the F word on policemen who are trying to protect him and his colleagues. And these are the same police who at the moment are facing the threat of death in carrying out their duty, as we've seen with a tragic attack on the two young police ladies. Now, the amazing thing about this article is that when you read through, it says that the government sources hope that this will be the end of the matter. The end of the matter, why? Because this gentleman has been given a dressing down by David Cameron. This defies belief that we can have this man whose job it is to bully and kick and whip and enforce other MPs to do David Cameron's bidding, and he's going to get a dressing down. What do you make of that?
That's just dog and pony cover statement by Downing Street. I don't see how David Cameron could give anybody a dressing down.
He's too weak, you mean?
Yeah. I do.
So we've got three examples here of the crass state of ministers in Westminster. And of course, if we look out the window at the tragic state of Britain today, and more people, of course, are watching the country falling apart, this is no accident. It's the direct result of policy by people like this man here.
And he's a microcosmic representation of the whole.
Yeah.
Okay, because all parts normally represent the whole. And if you see this from the chief whip, this sort of behavior to people who are putting their lives on the line for public safety, I'm talking about the police who are guarding these fairly important facilities, like Parliament and Downing Street, and this is how you treat them. This will give you an idea of the true arrogance. And imagine how this guy views his constituents.
Yeah.
If this is how he's treating the people that are guarding his life.
Yeah. So this man should stand down. We should start with getting this man to resign.
Certainly, in the past there would have been normal to call for him to resign.
Yeah. But of course Cameron won't, because he needs men like this to actually keep him in power.
Absolutely. Just like Tony Blair needed his key people in his inner circle. Yeah. Everyone else was disposable, but the ones that would protect him, he would keep, and they could get away with untold crimes and misdemeanors.
And of course there's another issue here, because under what is the true constitutional system, all votes in Westminster should be free and independent votes. So the use of whips to actually drive people into block voting is unconstitutional. So apart from anything else, perhaps the police, who may feel a bit aggrieved about this, should start to actually look at how these people are abusing the constitutional system. We know that across the country many individuals have reported this type of serious abuse as treason, and at the moment senior police officers, I think, are being a little bit nervous at actually taking these reports of treason through. But perhaps now Mr. Mitchell has shown his true colours, we might have police officers who are beginning to understand something very nasty is happening in Parliament.
People like I'll just finish off that people like Mr. Mitchell are kind of an embarrassment to the government when these sort of antics take place.
Yeah. But
will he be held accountable for it? I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll continue to report on that one. Now, the other topic we've got here is really coming on to this issue of very big global companies, largely connected in security, that are migrating into our public sector structure. And of course, G4S absolutely in the spotlight over its total fiasco during the Olympics. And we've got the article up on screen here at the moment. And basically what's going on is ministers are calling for their £57 million management fee to be withheld because their Olympic performance was such a shambles. So at the moment there's a great deal of argument going on. However, it says that MPs have stopped short of actually calling for Nick Buckles, the chief executive, to stand down. They do say that the most senior people in the company must take full responsibility for the unreliable data they have provided in how that contract was going. Now it seems to us here at the UK column that if it hadn't been for the tremendous effort by other media sources, we're not talking mainstream media, we're talking of all the people working internet sites, web-based radio, etc., for pointing out the true situation of G4S's failures, it would have never actually come into the public domain. Calling for senior executives to admit responsibility isn't exactly doing anything, is it? No,
and if you look at this story, what's interesting is G4S has already been on blacklists in this country, but this contract with the Olympics was rewarded before that. They were blacklisted only a few years ago, so they were grandfathered in for the Olympics. Now, you can't tell me that with 4 years' notice, that you can't deliver 7 or 8, 5, 6, 7,000 staff for an event in 2012. I believe personally that this contract was intentionally set up to fail. You can say that they're incompetent or whatever, but I believe it was set up to fail by certain people, and obviously the troops being deployed at the 11th hour in the numbers in which they were deployed, that was also not an overnight snap decision. Yeah. This would have to been planned. You can't just deploy 5,000, 6,000 British troops with a few weeks' notice. That would have had to been planned in advance, and really what I think it was to acclimatize the public to getting used to seeing men in uniform in civilian areas domestically. Yeah. So why that is, what's the agenda there, we're not sure yet. Obviously, you can look at a longer sort of plan for the militarization of Britain in more intense fashion in the future. Of course, this is happening much more quickly in the States at the moment, where across many US states, troops, Marines are appearing on the streets. Yep, drills are being organized, and also joint drills with other countries with US troops. The same, there were in Woolwich Arsenal that was hosting a number of foreign troops. Yeah. Over in East London, or just on the south bank of the Thames. So this is not unusual. So we're not really given privy to all of these sort of operations on British soil, but I think it's a matter of public interest. Well, just keeping an eye on the time on this one, the interesting thing about this, it says the Damming's Common Inquiry says the company itself agreed that the blame for the debacle lay firmly and solely with G4S. Well, my opinion is I don't actually agree, because whilst they must take some of the blame, the rest of the blame must go on the government, who actually put them in the position of taking the contract in the first place. And of course, as usual, G4S is going to take the full hit, but not the nobody from the government. So we really are seeing this elitist dictatorship coming into position. If we just move on from that, but just this one, we've got the Telegraph backing this up, saying that G4S is firmly and solely to blame. This is Keith Vaz. Well, he's certainly not going to be taking any blame for it. But if we come through to Serco, so we've got another one of these massive security companies, and the article here, again from The Guardian, is pointing out that basically when an audit was done, Serco had given false data about its GP service 252 times. So we've just heard in the previous article that G4S had also been telling porky pies, untruths,
And now we've got Serco, another massive global company. It's into control of nuclear weapons, it's controlling prisons, it's into hospitals. I believe in some local hospitals, Serco actually has leadership office on some of its doors. Mm-hmm. So here are these massive companies, and yet when we look at what they're doing, as they move into the public sector, they're telling lies.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if 5 or 10 years in the future you'll see G4S and Serco merging to become one company, and that they've got their hands in all sorts of industries. But if you're going to privatize the NHS, this is the sort of story you should get used to seeing on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Okay, so and what it is that if you privatize something like the national health, that large of an operation, what it's going to do, it's going to create internal inflation within that industry.
Yes.
So it's going to drive the price of everything up because the government at the end of the day will be somehow fitting the bill.
Yeah.
And anytime you have government involved in footing the bill or subsidizing anything, you see the prices of goods and services and labor skyrocket, and lots of subcontractors being used and consultancies being hired.
So we're kicking out the experienced public sector people on the excuse there's no money to run them. So dedicated public sector people are being edged out. We then bring in the private corporations who can do what they like, and they sack people, of course, when they're ready.
And same thing's happening in the military, by the way.
Absolutely.
The same trend is happening in the military.
Okay. Mike?
Well, what that says to me is that the private companies are putting the contract first, the service delivery second. The contract, the reporting on the performance of the contract. The performance of the contract is linked to how they get paid and what penalties they might pay if they don't meet their targets. They're quite willing to lie. There's no accountability as far as the taxpayer is concerned, and very little consequence or accountability as far as the contract is concerned. So the question to be asked in this case of Serco is, what are the penalties for the fact that they lied in the reports? The same for G4S. What are the penalties going to be? I think at the end of the day, after the Olympic investigation in Parliament, G4S will suffer very little consequence. They won't be blacklisted from future contracts. Serco will be blacklisted from future contracts on the back of this. This is going to be considered acceptable, or they may start calling it mistakes, but in fact it's not. They're protecting profits, and that's it, and forget about the service delivery for the taxpayer.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making those points. We just finish off on the fact that, of course, this incident has come from NHS Cornwall Primary Care Trust, so it's a local story effectively for the UK column, this is where the situation gets very mucky, because the Primary Care Trust said the Serco service was fundamentally safe and effective, but had faced clinical staffing challenges and issues with data handling. So the chief executive of Cornwall Primary Healthcare Trust takes what are basically inaccuracies in monitoring the contract, and he says, well, no problem. These are just issues with data handling. So here we've got the chief executive, of course, who will be on a massive salary, locked in with a private company, responsibility, accountability blurred. They cover up for each other. It's fun.
Yeah, mishandling of data, in other words, you can translate that as fiddling.
Fiddling.
That's exactly what it is. So let's get our terms correct.
Okay. Some people would say criminal, but maybe there's criminal fiddling as well as straight fiddling, or government fiddling. Overseas, really, Pakistan, there's some very interesting things happening at the moment. Lockdown, this is your area, Patrick.
Yeah, this is, Pakistan will naturally be a flare-up area with any sort of incitement of Islamic issues and so forth. So they've shut down a cinema showing American films, I believe, in Peshawar was firebombed. And they shut down YouTube. The government put a block on YouTube for 24 hours at least in order to calm down tensions in that country. But again, for the progenitors of this film and this idea that this film triggered off the original movements in Libya and Egypt, they've succeeded in letting it spread, and the media is obviously a partner, the mainstream media. Sky News this morning was still pushing this idea that James Murdoch's crew was pushing this idea that the Mohammed film is solely responsible for all protests. So again, it perfectly fits into the narrative of the Clash of Civilizations, which of course is an artificial narrative, the one that's been dropped on us and not something that's naturally organic.
So for people who are not familiar with that term, we're talking about conflict, wars and conflict deliberately being created in order to further a global political agenda.
And I'll just quickly underline this Mohammed film that's causing all this uprising around the world. This is a very sophisticated and expensive campaign of deception, which is used to manipulate and radicalize parts of the Muslim communities worldwide, and they've succeeded in doing that. There are accusations that the makers of this film are linked to a company that has ties with U.S. military contracts. And some of these things will start to come out over time. It will be very hard to conceal something that's such a high budget affair that has been used, to spread all over the world and create this sort of.
Well, part of the linkage that we're trying to really trying to expose through UK Column Live is that if we look at our own politicians and the standard and the morality, the values of people like Blair and Brown and Cameron, it should come as no surprise that these people are capable of acting in this, it's almost psychopathic way. I know there's a broad spectrum of definitions on that word, but are they capable of doing these sorts of events overseas to further their agenda?
I think not but beyond the political class. The political class will just run with whatever whichever way the wind's blowing on the flag. But there are interests that exist in America and in Israel, for instance, that really support this Mohammed film. They're really pushing it and trying to highlight it in order to manipulate people into this divide and conquer situation where people are fighting amongst each other.
Okay, well, how does this fit in? We got some information here from Mondevice.
Well, this is from Philip Weiss's blog in New York. Very interesting. There's an organization called Jews Against Islamophobia. It's a coalition of Jewish organizations that's condemning hate speech by this very interesting title of this group who ran this ad campaign in New York. They're called the American Freedom Defense Initiative. And that's a Jewish organization that's run loads of ads stating any war between the civilized man and the savage, support the civilized man, support Israel, defeat jihad. So an incredible quote, but that's really, again, you can't have the 24/7, 365 days a year Israeli security state without having an enemy or boogeyman, and they need to maintain this division of civilizations, this conflict, in order to justify the fact that they have an apartheid state bolted to the side of Israel, and that they're on 24/7 alert. You take this hate away, you take this division away, and you don't need the security state. And this is bad news for all the interests in the American military-industrial complex and the British military-industrial complex and the Jewish lobby, which is a fantastic money spinner for certain politicians and lobby groups. It's an industry. Conflict and division of society, particularly Muslim versus Jew or
Christian, all Christian in this country.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry globally, worldwide. And there's people who are absolutely profiting on it. And it's high time that people sort of, and they are waking up by the millions. People are now waking up. Israelis are waking up to the fact
to
that
see through it.
They see right through it.
So what have we got here with Watching America? Is this more part of the...
This is from a Syrian website, and it's a fantastic translated article from Arabic. If you Google Al-Qaida American Spring, you'll find this excellent article. And what it's really saying is that there was a deal struck between Al-Qaida and the House of Saud in Qatar to transfer members of Al-Qaida from Yemen to Syria. Now, when we say Al-Qaida, you can put in brackets CIA. really, because those two terms are transposable.
Mercenaries, to keep it easy.
And Saudi Arabia is, look, ever since Saudi Arabia went on to the dollar for their oil sales, okay, back in 1971, part of that deal was that any profits that they generated from their oil sales, they would put their money in U.S. Treasury bonds, and money and their wealth would be held in New York City, for instance. So, and in return for that, the U.S. would give them military protection. But over the years, they've managed to develop this mujahideen force that was deployed in Afghanistan to rout the Soviets, and it existed after that as Al-Qaida. The word Al-Qaida represents all the freedom fighters, or the database of freedom fighters, first generation, second generation, that are controlled and directed and run by Saudi intelligence via U.S. intelligence, and British intelligence are also play a role in that.
Which we know because the government's telling us they got a role in it.
And so they've deployed them in Syria, and the Americans are being very quiet about the suicide bombs that are going off, about innocent people, Christians that are being cleansed from Homs and other cities in Syria, and not protesting at all. So, and on one side of Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or Mitt Romney or whoever the puppet is, they'll say Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda, and on the other side, they're supporting Al-Qaeda financially, logistically. Al Jazeera is providing sat phones for Al-Qaeda in Syria, and that's a media organization being involved in the destabilization of Syria. So total hypocrisy, total arming terrorists, basically. That's what they're doing, and they're killing people in order to achieve regime change in Syria.
Yeah.
Quite simple, and this article sees directly through this, and many people are beginning to see the hypocrisy.
Right, so we recommend people have a look at some of this material, and as is often said, don't just believe what we say, please check it out for yourselves. Please do some research. Of course, anything that's happening in Britain or the world, we have to start having a look at money. And we've focused in here on the issue of jobs and what's being said about money. Mike, you got some comments on, or Patrick, you want to start on this, do you?
Well, this is the National Office of Statistics came out with some figures this week, and so we hear a lot about the big society, Brian. This is the jobless society. This is the big jobless society, or the hopeless society, as it were. Incredible numbers. We have 25% of youth in London are unemployed. Okay, this is 25 and unders. And nationwide, there's been a 100% increase in job seekers' allowance since the last general election. And also, the cost of this will be $28 billion over the next decade. Okay, so this is from the National Office of Statistics, and really, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. And I'll bet you these numbers are also massaged downwards. I bet the figures are much higher than this. And what you have is there's a lot of people who are now trying to get an expensive education. And with their degree, there will be no jobs for them waiting when they finish. A lot of overqualified people. But you know, it's typical. This is the direction that society is moving in. We talked yesterday about the breakdown of society.
Yes.
And certainly in America, this is also a trend with heavily indebted, educated kids with no opportunities in the workplace. There are no jobs. The jobs have been offshored.
So we're back on our government lying to us, because you've got this information. You're seeing the picture out there, but we're not being told the truth. Mike,
I would say that this is a deliberate attempt to frustrate and enrage and a generation of people. I would say that the summer riots last year were a rehearsal for this. They are going to aim to anger and frustrate and enrage young people to such an extent that the slightest thing is going to kick them off into some kind of civil disobedience, some kind of last summer style event, and this is quite a dangerous situation. We should be providing these people with the opportunity to build a future for themselves. These politicians, this government, are providing them with no future,
and that is deliberate.
It is deliberate, and we're not saying that things should be handed to young people on a plate, but the opportunities for young people to build lives for themselves, absolutely, that's part of the responsibility of government. Otherwise, what's the point of having them?
Yeah.
And to take the tuition raises in this country, for instance, the biggest beneficiary that no one talks about the hike in university fees, are the banks. They're the ones who are going to be issuing more loans than ever.
Well, and of course the student debt was sold on to foreign banks. So at the moment that student debt, which is is the sum of billions, and 3 comes to my mind, but somebody can correct me on that. That has now been passed on to foreign banks.
And the other thing you're going to see with result of joblessness is you're going to see an increase in crime, and you're going to see an increase in black market. I'm talking about drug dealing and cash sort of things, and that's crime rate will go up. And so you can see this is the perfect storm we're looking in the next few years. And it's not a pretty picture.
Unless we do something about it. We're going to stay on a positive note. Now, Mike, I know this one is straight into your area. So it's to do with UK public sector borrowing, and a simple look at what the mainstream media are telling us at the moment shows that somebody is not telling the truth.
Well, this is really about how the same story is presented by the BBC, the main propagandist outlet, and, for example, the Telegraph. So if we look at the BBC story first, they're basically saying UK public sector borrowing unchanged. They're saying UK public sector net borrowing was 14.4 billion in August, and little has changed from the same month next year. And then as you read down the article, you find that the message is actually slightly different than the headline and the sort of leader implies. So if we look at the next slide, the Telegraph's take on the same story is UK budget deficit widens to biggest on record for August, pointing out that it rose to 14.41 billion from 14.37 billion. But I mean, so the BBC isn't wrong in saying that it's not terribly different from last year, but the way that the information is presented by the BBC implies that actually things aren't too bad. And the main question that both articles don't really ask is, bearing in mind that all the government departments have been asked to cut back and cut back and cut back, why is this having making no apparent difference to government borrowing? What is the government doing with the money if Osborne is not going to beat his borrowing targets on a long-term basis, while at the same time heads of government departments are having to cut back on spending? What is this money? The difference between the cutback and the spending and the borrowing not changing, what is that money being used for? And I don't think we're being told. No. Well, we're usually not told because the aim of the government is to cover up what they're doing, which is why they want control of the media. An eye on the clock. I know we're on our own today, so we can just give you one more piece of information, which I think is quite an interesting one. We've got the a gentleman called Peter Sutherland, who's telling peers the future prosperity of many EU states depends on them becoming multicultural, and this is incredible language. The EU should do its best to undermine the you're going to have to help me with this. I know I was going to have trouble with this word.
Homogeneity. Yeah,
thank you. Of its member states. I admit I was coming into a trap on that one. So the bit that interests me is the word undermine, because this is totally the language of the political charity Common Purpose, which is being used, amongst other things, to drive this so-called diversity programme. So we've got a situation which we're just proven that we haven't got enough jobs for the people in this country already. Doesn't matter what colour or religion they are. We're now saying we've just got to have totally no border controls at all in order to achieve this diversity agenda, which is coming from this gentleman. Now he's tied in with a variety of organisations which are all dealing with global matters. So he's talking about United States, Australia, and New Zealand. We shouldn't have nation states, and that's precisely what the European Union, in my view, should be doing its best to undermine. So he's lecturing at the London School of Economics, but who is he? Well, he's a non-executive chairman of Goldman Sachs International and a former chairman of oil giant BP, and he heads the Global Forum on Migration and Development. So we asked, who is this man and what mandate has he got to come in and tell us how to manage this country, which seems to have survived particularly well until we've had the likes of him and the politicians. And if we just show a little bit of information to end on, this is the front cover of a United Nations document. It's teacher's notes, so it's an educational publication. And on the left is a quote: UN staff are international civil servants and answer to the United Nations alone for their activities. When joining the UN, staff members take an oath not to seek or receive instructions from any government or outside authority. So what this document proves at a stroke is the fact that the UN is running its own agenda. It's not accountable to nation states, including Britain. And the UK column and some brilliant researchers that are working across the country have been digging into the fact that we can now show that UN policy on such issues as multicultural society, Agenda 21, transition towns, all of this is coming straight out of the UN and straight into UN cells, who then push it straight into civil service policy. So when we see in the papers talk about Parliament, Westminster being closed for refurbishment, the reason for that is they have very nearly got this one world government embedded into the UK. But what sheer arrogance that one of the bankers who has helped create the mess that is the world financial economy at the moment, the suffering, the hunger, the shortage of food, and this man is lecturing us on what should happen in this country. How do we deal with it? I think we expose these people. Any other ideas, Patrick?
We have to expose them, and also I think any students at the London School of Economics, hopefully they're waking up to what's really happening in society, and they would stand up during the lecture and tell this gentleman off, put him in his ideological place.
Politely but forcefully.
Yes, and but again, this is the United Nations is running around national sovereignty. So the nation state, if you put the words nation state here, it's the enemy of a globalist ideology or a world government. Syria is being destroyed simply for the fact that it's a secular, non-religious, multicultural nation state. And it's one of the last few remaining ones in the region. Right. That's why it's being smashed. That's why they want regime change in that country. That is the main reason. You cannot colonize economically Syria. The banks cannot come in and colonize their economy if they are a secular nation state and that they are, able to be self-sufficient.
Yeah.
That doesn't jibe with globalization. So that's something we need to look at. And also national identities and culture, the evisceration of local culture.
Yeah.
This is also something that is going to happen with the UN programs like Agenda 21. If anybody works for the UN out there, you need to take a look at what your employer is actually wanting to achieve in your local area.
Okay. Well, we've overrun, which we're allowed to do because this is UK Column Live and not the BBC. So I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us today. If you find some of the topics we're talking about heavy, get out there and research. And if you want to stop what's happening to your country and society, then first find out the facts, expose what's going on, challenge the people doing it. But above all, please stand up and be counted. Thank you very much. Goodbye.